Hi, I'm Katie Forrester and I am a subject lead for sociology. It's great to be at a curriculum thinking event sharing what we do here at Ralph Allen School. I'm going to talk about how rethinking our GCSE sociology curriculum led to better outcomes for our GCSE students, and planning all the content, the retrieval, the application of knowledge and all the assessment together gave our students better results and a better knowledge and understanding of sociology. As you know, sociology is often a new subject and it's full of difficult new ideas for GCSE students. And I began to feel it was just a bit too overwhelming to be using PowerPoints and expect students to frequently write things down from the board or to use the textbook for gaps. And there's so much in those textbooks. And one of our challenges as teachers is to think about how to get information over to students and then make sure that that information becomes knowledge for them. And I just didn't feel like I was doing this well. And so I did some research, and that research led me to a book by Jo Facer, which is called Simplicity Rules. And in that, she says, tell them what it is that they need to know what it is that you want them to know. Then be confident that your subject is interesting without all those bells and whistles, which of course it is in sociology. Um, and so then I started to think really carefully about exactly what I wanted the students to know, rather than just covering an area of the specification or an area of the textbook. And I knew I really needed to reduce the curriculum, and I started to think about creating booklets. I realised I didn't have to reinvent the wheel, and so I found, after a long bit of research, some straightforward ones by somebody called Kate Henney, who is an English teacher, but she spent some time teaching sociology. I found that she had done most of what I wanted to do, and I cut back the curriculum to include all the important content for the students. And she created booklets that included exam activities and scaffolds. So much of my job was already done. So thank you, Miss Henny. I think the original booklets are still on Facebook or X, and I have a feeling that some of her ideas are based on Adam Boxer's work on booklets. I know that he has a blog and a podcast, and I've listened to that podcast sometimes. He's also worked with one of my colleagues, Dr. Wilkinson, who is also a fan of booklets and textbooks, which do the same thing. But until somebody writes a slimmed down version of a sociology textbook, we are where we are, though I think there is one or two available for science. The original booklets, like I said before, are by somebody called Kate Henney, and she shared these booklets online during lockdown, but I had to create an introductory one for myself because there didn't seem to be one of those available. Um, so this means that because we're using booklets, nothing is done outside of them, or nothing is done outside of those booklets in an exercise book. All the content, the retrieval, the practice exam questions, the scaffolds, the key term glossaries, the knowledge organisers, question banks, they're all in one place, and lesson content and activities are within the booklet, and subject specialists don't really have to plan at all. So they can update their knowledge, they can rethink parts of the course, but day to day, they're not planning at all. And of course, this vastly reduces workload, and that load on working memory for both the student and the teacher. And it's made space for assessment and feedback. And it's also helped in setting cover work and ensured that we covered both the curriculum and the way that it's assessed efficiently by the time students sit their external exams. So in the introductory booklet, we outline the curriculum, we include the information from AQA on how they'll be examined, and we include instructions for homework, which is always the same, and that's to mind map or self-quiz. And this is to make sure that they are retrieving often enough. If you think about it, they're doing 38 more times the amount of retrieval that they could be doing otherwise. We also sometimes ask them to prepare for an assessment, and we'd ask them then to additionally prepare flashcards or have a go at practice questions and so on. The images on this slide show that useful information that students are given. Here's an example of a knowledge organiser, which is found in each one of the booklets. It's used for homework and sometimes inside the lessons also. We might use blank ones for retrieval or sometimes for during revision periods. I realise that we have to be really careful when we're using these, and we need to use them wisely. We can't rely on just the knowledge in these. We need that detail outside of the knowledge organisers too. So you have to teach students how to use them properly, and we have to think about how we're using them in the lesson. Here I've included an example of a student homework. They've mind mapped what they could remember from some topic areas, and then they've checked their knowledge against the knowledge organiser and the wider booklet, and then they've added some of what they didn't know in a different colour. So as I said earlier, this is meaning that students are retrieving regularly, 38 times a year, if it's set every week. But of course, I think really it's most effective when it's paired with some sort of assessment in lessons. It could be part of your do nows and so on, but it's more successful then when there is one teacher per group rather than shared groups, because you're able to build some momentum for those assessments, and it's easier to keep track of who has been completing homework and not completing homework, where there's one of you keeping tabs on that group. So often that's not possible, but in some years it is. Our lessons actually look like, well, every lesson starts with some retrieval, as it does in lots of schools now. So not to waste time, students keep their booklets together in a folder and they pick these up on the way in, and then they settle and get on with the do now pretty much immediately, so that no time's wasted. What they're expected to do is repeated on the board as well as inside the booklets, and the questions are integrated into those. As you can see here, we've got some questions that are integrated into the main body of the booklets on the left-hand side, and then some do now retrieval activities which are at the back of the booklets that we could use instead. Also, what we're doing is going over perhaps something from last week, a couple of weeks ago, maybe a year ago, and so on. We include low-hanging fruit so that students can feel successful. Students will use a different colour pen to complete what it was they weren't sure of, and there's an example there of student work. Once we've done this activity, we'll then reactivate knowledge from their previous lesson, perhaps using the mini whiteboards, maybe including hinge questions and so on, if you're familiar with those. And this helps with the content in this particular session. I might use my own memory to create those questions, or I might scan the booklets for that, or I might use the students' own responses to build on further questions. But of course, all of those questions could also be planned into the booklets and might be particularly helpful for non-specialists also if you were putting a teacher booklet together as well. Once all that retrieval is complete, I will introduce the new content to the class. I will read it out so that I'm pronouncing all the words correctly and I'm introducing new terms. The booklet is shown on the visualizer and students follow along and add any annotations that I make into their own booklet. There's an example of that below. We then apply what we've learned to potential exam questions or some other activity, but it's usually written. I'll occasionally show a clip, but this will not be crucial as all the content is inside the booklet. I'll use model examples, or I'll ask students to provide a scaffold. Then I'll model a response, or I will get a student response for some immediate feedback, and we'll mark that together on the visualizer. Students will use a different colour pen to make their own improvements. We also include some reading that's beyond the curriculum inside the booklet, so some academic sociological text, such as an extract from Willis's Learning to Labour, or maybe we'll use a newspaper article. And this helps to develop literary skills and give students access to academic texts that are beyond the spec. And some students, of course, might not otherwise be given the opportunity to access texts like those. So, I mean, some might say, well, why not just use a textbook? You've just designed a mini textbook, but there's no way that we could cover the course using the textbook in only 5 lessons a fortnight. There are some really great books, but they include so much information and sometimes some distractions. And so ideally, it'd be great to explore everything that's in a textbook, but the reality is we just don't have time at GCSE. Unless you were to hand over that content to students to complete independently. But of course, that might be too much for students to handle. And also, these booklets are much more straightforward for students to revise from. Scaffolds are included throughout the booklet, but reminders are at the back for when students are completing bank questions, or for when they're preparing for assessments or for the real thing. We do try to ensure that there's no downtime when students finish a piece of work. and are waiting for others to finish. So those that have finished would go straight to the back of the booklets and find some bank questions to complete, or they might do some mind mapping of a previous bit of the course. Scaffolds are useful for revision, of course. We tend to start with them and then reduce their use until eventually there are none in the exam type questions, and that mimics, of course, what they're going to experience in the exam. But we also provide reminders for them. Sometimes we tell students to turn to their scaffolds in the booklet as long as they're not looking at anything else in the booklet at that time. They can use them to have a go at some exam questions that are outside of the booklet too. And this is an example of the bank questions, so that there is no downtime. Sometimes they appear in the list like format, sometimes they're in a grid. You can make up your own, students can make up their own as well. It just takes a little bit of training to get them going with this sort of activity. We also include glossaries of different formats, so we teach the key terms ahead and explain them within the text as we're going along, as is recommended as part of our disciplinary literacy strategies that I'm sure you're all using in your schools as well. But we do this along with blank glossaries, which are good downtime activities and revision aids. We also include a complete glossary and introductory booklet just to use as a reference guide, whether that's during lessons or whether that's at home for revision purposes and so on. At least they have a full list somewhere to hand. So we really feel that we've had success from changing our curriculum and bookletising it, for want of a better way of describing what we've done. The beta research, or the beta research, seems to suggest that students love the subject and are succeeding. And many students do say that they're finding the subject, or have found the subject, more enjoyable since we have bookletised the course. We feel that it suits students of all needs. It would be possible to adapt lessons further. I'd really like to record lessons, for example, for those who will use a scribe or a reader, and it's easier for those students to revise too. At the moment, we recommend tutor to you videos for now, but recording our own lessons would be a really, really useful addition. I'm also in the process of creating teacher booklets for non-specialists, and then students will get a similar experience no matter who the teacher is that they have. It's not really always possible for non-specialists to model responses on the spot, and so they might prefer to have those ready. And if we can support them in every way possible, they'll much prefer teaching it, much prefer working with us. So I hope that a lot of what I've said today has been useful to you, some of which you may have heard already, but it might be handy to get an idea of how booklets could be used in your lessons too, when planning your whole curriculum and delivering your whole curriculum too. Here's a list of resources for you to refer to. So in the files section, there should be access to what I've listed here. Let me know if you've got any questions. I'd really love to hear about what you're doing. I wonder what you've decided to take out of your curriculum and what you've decided to keep in. I'm wondering also how you deliver the content and ensure all your students have a record of it, and then also how you organise your retrieval and make sure that you are testing what it is that the students really need to know. Anyway, I'll look forward to hearing from you. Here are some of the ideas I've built on. If you're having a big redesign, do read Simplicity Rules by Joe Facer, have a chat with Abigail Hughes, who I mentioned on this slide, or read some of Adam Box's ideas. I also recommend that you take a look at the booklets that I have here, or find Kate Henney's original ones. And a big thank you to her for sharing her booklets online so that everybody could benefit from them. That's it from me. So I hope you found some useful ideas here for you to implement in your own settings.